welcome to Pelvic Confessions. I am Dr. Carrie Howe, joined by my business partner and co-host, Dr. Jean Shirakabrad.
On this show, we have conversations and discuss topics in the realm of women's health and pelvic health that women should have, but don't often have the opportunity to have.
We like to present these topics of conversation as confessions that maybe women have told me in the clinic, but also add in some tips and tricks along the way from my perspective as a pelvic health physical therapist.
And tips and tricks they shall get today.
Yep.
Our mugs are still here, so we're still
green.
in the March time period, still green. So regardless of when you're watching this, it might be 10 years from now, but know that when this was recorded, it was March, and we were very much seasonal in with our mugs still. Tips and tricks, you brought that up. So we've been kind of branching out on topics. Confessions are still important, and then kind of talk about more clinically relevant things that happen. But I think tips and tricks are great because they're so actionable. Right? So here are a few things that we quite literally do with our women in the clinic, and we help them out. So that's kind of where we're headed today. Before we get started, if you've been enjoying these, head over to Instagram and subscribe. We got a lot of content coming, including blog posts, as well as many blogs in the works. But also, like, you'll see these tips and tricks type videos, the Instagram reels, give you like little strategies to do, and you can head over to at Restore Pelvic PT to check those out. So they'll be on there. Tips and tricks, but let's talk about no real tricks. I mean, this is science.
Yeah,
right? This is
sure.
a clinical approach. This confession is again in that realm. So we're going to talk about some beginner or early strategies to get the pelvic floor stronger, strengthen the pelvic floor.
Yep.
So what are we delving into today?
Yeah, we're talking about the Kegels.
No, isn't that like completely off the topic? Like you're not allowed to say Kegels anymore?
It's swung. The pendulum has swung. Kegels used to, I think pelvic floor therapy used to be synonymous with Kegels.
That was all, yeah.
And then there was a time where Kegels were banned and it was bad and you don't do them. But they do have their clinical relevance, and it is pronounced Kegel. We say Kegel a lot, but it was Dr. Kegel is the one that it was coined after.
Does he like kegs a lot?
Sure. But what a Kegel is, quite literally, is a contraction of the pelvic floor muscles. So much like I contract my arm or my bicep and I get that activation. Always showing the guns.
Yeah, any opportunity. Yep.
That's what a pelvic floor contraction is. It's quite literally taking those muscles and closing off the openings down there and squeezing the muscles. So similar to stopping the flow of urine, that's what an isolated pelvic floor contraction, aka a Kegel, is.
Yeah. So Kegels were all the rage for pelvic floor when it was announced, and then pelvic floor was kind of coming into its own. Yep. Everything was about weakness. Right? The pelvic floor is always weak, so you have to do the strengthening. Then, as more information came out, like most things, when something gets too popular, there's always a counterculture that comes from it, and then people are like, us included, we've talked about this, but with nuance, that there's a lot more to them than just Kegels, which is also true, and we'll talk about that in a future video. But we don't want to lose sight that they were popular and important for a reason, and that reason still exists.
Yep.
And that reason is for strength.
Absolutely. Yep. So again, we've talked about this spectrum before of those muscles. There's a spectrum of very loose, very weak, very low tone muscles, all the way to very overactive, very tight, very on guard muscles. Yep. And so the candidate for learning to Kegel would likely be somebody who falls on that lower tone weakness spectrum.
So if you, for a visual standpoint, you have your pelvic model there. We keep saying muscles, and I think sometimes it's still hard to process because you don't see them, right? Just like you see the biceps.
Hopefully you see it.
Those muscles are so superficial and always in plain sight.
Yes.
So we make that connection. Oh, if I don't work those muscles, I can see them not have tone and definition. the muscles in the pelvis you don't see. What makes it even worse is the feel is so intense,
Yeah.
right? So you have to only go by
Yeah.
feel. So how does somebody differentiate when something might be weak if they can't see it? Is there a certain feel that is associated with it?
That's really tough because a lot of these pelvic floor symptoms can overlap. I think the old train of thought used to be anytime there's leaking or anytime there's prolapse or heaviness symptoms or sensations of feeling bulging, that was always associated with weakness. But that's not the case now. We're finding that again, some of those once low tone diagnoses can actually have some issues with overactivity. So in general, right? Again, something like urinary leaking, potentially feeling some sensations
Mhm.
of weakness or heaviness would fall more into the category of weakness, but not always.
Got it. So let's talk about then Kegels. And again, if you are having issues and you're not sure if Kegels are right for you,
Yeah.
you can schedule an appointment with
Yep.
Dr. Carey at restorepelvicpt.com. If you're somewhere in Maryland, if you're outside of Maryland, find a pelvic PT that can help you out in your area. Um, so I'm sure there's a gazillion YouTube videos.
Yes.
Everyone has their own way because they want the attention, obviously, but also to help. How do you properly perform a
Mm-hmm.
Kegel?
Yeah. Again, the proper way to perform a Kegel is very isolated, meaning that when I'm performing them, you're not seeing my legs and my glutes clench. It's all
Mm,
internal. So if we go back to this, I just want to give a visual of the muscles that we
mhm.
are trying to access. This being my pelvic model, all of this white being bone. If you take a look inside and you can see all of that bright, beautiful pink musculature, those are your deep pelvic floor muscles. Also, on the outside, we have superficial muscles that wrap around these openings. And so, an activation of the muscles is a squeeze around those openings and it's a lift upward. And so, some ways to cue that are to think about if you sit there and you try to stop the flow of urine like you're sitting on a toilet. Some people respond really well to trying to squeeze your butthole,
Hmm.
or try to pick a blueberry up with your vagina. It's a squeeze and kind of this lift motion. Now, oftentimes, I shouldn't say oftentimes, but frequently,
At times.
at times, women think they're kegling and they're actually not. They're squeezing their glutes or they're accidentally bearing down or they're not accessing the right muscles.
Mm.
So what we always do on that first initial assessment when we're performing an internal assessment is we're assessing, is this person a candidate? Is it weakness or is it overactivity? And if it is weakness, can they access these muscles and perform a Kegel in the appropriate way?
And how long does it take to see progress from a Kegel? Because that's,
Yeah,
if you're doing bicep curls,
right.
you have several weeks that you have to do it and progressively overload it.
Yeah.
It's not like you're lifting weights with
Sure.
those muscles.
It's the same. They are muscles. So usually, I'm telling my women, oftentimes the first few weeks is even just connecting with the muscles to your brain.
Mhm.
Like it might not even be that we're really developing true strength, but
Right.
more so we're getting your brain better connected to that area to be able to coordinate it in the way that we want to. I mean, we can see progress as quickly as a week if they're depending on where they are at in terms of their um, function with it.
Sure.
But you can see progress relatively quickly.
Yeah, and progress could simply be them better activating it, right?
Correct.
Instead of squeezing their glutes. Now they're like, oh, now I get it.
Correct.
Now I'm kind of picking up that blueberry or whatever visual
Yep.
they're using. Um, how long do you prescribe
Mm-hmm.
Kegels before you might switch out to something else?
Yeah, depends.
Sure.
No, but what I do want to make known is that while the Kegels are very clinically useful, and I need my women to be able to access and isolate those muscles, there has to be a progression upon that. We can't rely solely just on squeezing those muscles. How long does that take? I hate to say it truly, it depends.
Yeah.
I have some women who I can't even prescribe a Kegel right off the bat because they have such a hard time finding those muscles.
Sure.
I have other women who can do the Kegel quite well lying down, but then we're having a hard time accessing pelvic floor if we go to squat or we go to deadlift.
Mhm.
So it really truly does depend. Usually though, like on general, it might be just a a couple of weeks or handful of weeks of isolated pelvic floor work until we're really then prioritizing incorporating that into something a little more functional.
Okay. So Kegels are not the worst,
Correct.
not the best, always, but they're useful.
Yes.
There's a use, a time and place. And
Yep.
again, if you need to know what that time and place is specific for your needs, you could head over to Restore Pelvic PT to schedule an appointment to get checked out. But Kegels are not the end all be all. There's other exercises and other progressions. So, what else
Yep.
do you utilize for women from a beginner standpoint?
Yeah, from a beginner standpoint, I actually, for women who are having a hard time finding the pelvic floor muscles and generating
Mhm.
a Kegel, I found really good success with actually focusing on more abdominal, transverse abdominis engagement
That's a big
first.
word.
It is a big word, right? Our deepest core, our deepest abdominal muscle.
Thank you.
Sorry, Jean. Our deepest abdominal muscle is called your transverse abdominis. And it is quite literally your internal corset. So it wraps around the front and the back. And that has connections with pelvic floor through our breathing. So those muscles kind of coordinate together as we breathe. As we take a nice big inhale and things, belly expands, pelvic floor gets a little drop. And then as we exhale, and we release that air, we get a little cinching of that
Mm.
abdominal muscle, and pelvic floor kind of comes along for the lift. It gets a little bit of that upward lift. So I found really good success starting there as a base for women to you can conceptualize your abdomen a little bit better. I can
Yeah.
get them in front of the mirror, they can see it, they can see the motion,
Hmm.
and then their brain's not preoccupied with trying to find an area that they're not connected to. So, doing what we call activation breaths, quite literally blowing out through a straw as your stomach cinches down, is going to get some of that engagement.
It seems like, unlike what people traditionally consider strength or
Hmm.
strength training, seems like there's a huge mind body connection with
Yeah,
a lot of these exercises that you're focusing the ladies to really zone
connect.
in and hone into
Yep,
that
yep.
part of their body. Is that a big part of the process as
It
well?
is. It's a big part of the first step of the
Mhm.
process because if they can't easily access those muscles while they're consciously trying to think about it,
Yeah.
it's really hard to rely on them when you're so preoccupied for those muscles to quickly turn on if you can't even find them.
Right.
So, a big step of the process is that awareness, that
Hmm.
connection. And so that's why I say, depending on how difficult it is to find those muscles, the first month or two might even just be trying to connect to that area.
Yeah. And the transversus, that muscle is a reflexive muscle, so it's hard as is. So if you give it time and actually think about how to activate it, you give your system a
Yep,
better shot at going for it.
yep,
All right, so we have Kegels,
yep,
we have transversus abdominis
yep.
activation, the deepest layer of your abdominal muscles.
Hmm.
Let's do
Okay,
one more muscle or one more
I got it.
strength training. You
I
got
got it.
it?
My favorite.
Hit it.
Can you take a guess?
The only thing that pops into my mind is squatty potty for some
Oh,
reason
okay.
when you
Okay,
say food.
close. Close. So glute bridges, building up the
Um,
glutes, right? Your
Not
glute,
bicep curls.
not bicep curls. My maybe I should say my second
Got
favorite.
it.
My favorite muscles, glutes and biceps.
You are,
What can I say?
yeah.
Um, your glute muscles on the backside have a strong connection with your pelvic floor. So oftentimes when we're getting glute engagement,
Mhm.
we can be getting pelvic floor engagement as well. So it's another way to kind of secondarily
Mm.
strengthen the pelvic floor without having to do a conscious Kegel.
Yeah.
So those of you who are unfamiliar with a glute bridge exercise, it's basically lying on your back with your knees bent and then lifting your butt up in the air and back down. And so we can incorporate a Kegel with that. We can incorporate some transverse abdominis work with that, or we can just have them focus on
Mm.
feeling a good burn in their glutes.
When working the glute bridge, is there a sense of too easy, too hard? Like, what are you going after? Where is it?
Yep.
Does it even matter as long as you're getting that movement and activation going?
What I'm looking for is for them to feel engagement in their
What
glutes.
does that feel like usually?
A kind of a burn, a
Mhm.
booty burn
A
is what
booty
we
burn?
yeah is what we like to call it. But yeah, as long as they're feeling it in the backside of their legs and in their glutes, that's a pretty good sign that they're getting engagement there.
Okay. And we'll have a video on Instagram at Restore Pelvic PT showing you these three movements, how to do them. how to integrate them into your day to day, give you a visual so you can head over to our Instagram page. Um, that is a much different muscle than the first two we talked about, right?
Yeah.
The Kegels, we're talking about internal pelvic floor. Transverses, again, you can't see
Yep.
deep down abdominals. The glutes, you
Yeah.
can see. Is there a different prescription in terms of how many repetitions they're doing, how many they're doing, because
Mm.
it's such a different muscle?
Not necessarily. Okay, maybe I take that back. Especially the transverse abdominis muscle, I want a lot of
Mhm.
repetitions throughout the day. So I like that frequent repetition of maybe they're doing 5 breaths in a different position, each and every day.
Yeah.
Whereas the glutes would kind of classify more into the traditional rehab exercise
Mhm.
prescription of, maybe you're doing 2 to 3 sets of 8 to 15 repetitions 3 to 4 times a week.
Got it.
Yeah.
So there you go. Three different types of exercises, targeting really three different areas, but still regarding your pelvic floor. Um, Kegels, transversus abdominis activation, and glute bridge. And again, we're kind of giving you this beginner initiation into some of these exercises. They're readily available. You can do them, but the big but here, no pun intended, is is that you need to understand what you're trying to feel,
Yes.
right? To get
Yep.
the proper activation and
Yep.
sensation of the muscles. So if you need help with that, you can head over to restorepelvicpt.com and schedule an appointment right on our website. You're more than welcome to give us a call. There's a phone number on the website as well if you want more clarification or you have questions that you want to chat about. As well as head over to Restore Pelvic PT on Instagram, where you'll see more reels and videos such as the exercises that we talked about today. Thanks for tuning in to Pelvic Confessions. Dr. Gene Shirakpad here with Dr. Carrie Howe, and we'll catch you again on the next episode. Cheers.
Cheers. I thought you were reaching for my mug.
No, I got my own coffee.